Hello and welcome to Risk at Work, Risk Connect's educational web series. I'm Scott Fenstermaker. I'm the head of digital marketing for Risk Connect. Today we're talking about autonomous IRM, AI agents revolutionizing risk management. And I know how excited you are to hear another presentation about somebody talking about something having to do with AI. I know you wanted that one last AI presentation that because nobody was talking about it enough. Society was not talking about AI enough. And fortunately, we have a brand new paradigm to talk about and a brand new take. We are living at the advent of the latest evolution of large language model AI, which is now called agentic AI, the idea that large language model platforms can now execute actions based on conclusions that they draw. And we can now leverage this incredible new capability to further enhance risk management. So instead of talking about the risks that some things like this will pose, and certainly they do, we're actually going to talk about how to leverage this to improve risk management systems and what organizations can do. And we've got the perfect guest to talk to this today. I know I always say that, but I always think that if you are going to either talk about IRM, risk management, or rob a bank, in either of those cases, you are going to require a good wheelman. And we have the best wheelman to talk about this stuff today. So first of all, a little bit of housekeeping. Number one, if you have any questions for our guests today, please put them in the questions field of your webinar software. If we don't answer that question during the course of the webinar, we will reach out to you directly and get you an answer to your question from our guest. Also, if you have indicated that you would like CPE credit for attending this webinar, please watch your inbox. After we're done today, we're going to send you a short 3-question quiz. Fill that out, send it back, and we will reply to you with your CPE credit. All right, we're going to bring on our wheelman, the best wheelman. He is the founder and CEO of Wheelhouse Advisors. He is formerly the global research leader in risk management technology markets at Gartner, where he was a many-time top author recipient and a Thought Leadership Award winner. His professional roles have spanned executive management, finance, risk management, audit, and IT. I am very happy to welcome back to Risk at Work, John Wheeler. John, how you doing, man?
I'm doing very well, Scott, and thanks for having me on the webinar today. I'm really looking forward to talking about this very interesting topic to me, something that I've been tracking for quite a while, and looking forward to sharing some of the insights that I think are going to apply to many of the listeners on today's webinar, but also for you, my friend, give you an idea of how things are shaping up and how I might rob a bank with autonomous IRM.
Autonomous IRM is probably going to do a lot of robbing of people, but that's a different webinar.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, let's get started. I'm going to jump right in. So everyone buckle up and here we go. So I wanted to start out by talking a little bit about autonomous IRM in the context of what's going on today, and specifically what's going on with Risk Connect and the platform that they have built their software on, and that is Salesforce. For those of you who may not know, Salesforce is a major player in the agentic AI space, and they're making great inroads at using AI agents in a variety of different use cases across the business and starting to include risk management. But I make this statement right at the outset here. Autonomous IRM is the future of risk management. I'm sure you see that, and the first question is why? Why is it the future of risk management? Well, there are 3 reasons. I'm going to start with the first here, and the first is at the top of everyone's list, and that is money. With any new technology, it's always about the money, follow the money. What are we going to get out of this from a pure dollars and cents standpoint? And Salesforce estimates that AI agents are going to reduce service costs across their customer base by upwards of 40%. And this is amazing to me in that these use cases are so wide ranging and are going to transform organizations in ways that they don't really understand. And this is why we need to talk about the risk management impacts of this, because a lot of companies are jumping in headfirst, and they could be jumping into the shallow end of the pool if they're not careful. So money is the driver here, and it's going to save you and a lot of other companies a lot of cost. But at the same time, what companies are looking to do is to increase speed. And here's an example, and this comes from Salesforce as well, of one of their customers, which is a Fortune 500 logistics provider. They are using Agentforce, which is what Salesforce calls their agentic AI platform, and they're reporting 3 times faster incident resolution through automated case triage, including workflow and escalations, and on the back end, ensuring that they are getting the service level agreement compliance that they contracted to. So you can see just in this very simple, quick example, the agentic AI not only spans the organization in terms of business functions, it spans business processes. And then finally, the third reason that we're seeing agentic AI come to the fore and why autonomous IRM is going to be the future of risk management is all about focus. And when I say focus, I think this goes to the heart of a lot of risk compliance, audit leaders, security leaders about the fear of AI and how it's going to impact their job. What I'm seeing and what I think is going to be the real opportunity for everyone on today's call is the ability to use agentic AI to augment their capabilities and to allow that focus, that higher level focus on more strategic activities. So removing all the repetitive, redundant work that can be handled and has been handled in the past by chatbots and others, but take it to another level. And so Salesforce, um, within their own organization, they're using Agentforce and are handling 96% of their HR queries without any form of human input, and reducing, coming back to the money side, they're reducing the support costs by millions of dollars annually. So it's a full loop here. It's all about the money, it's all about the speed, and it's all about the focus.
This is fascinating to me. So that 3 times faster incident resolution is incredible to me. There's a couple of things I'm looking at here that are worth highlighting. Number one is I'm old enough to remember when email first came out, and everybody thought that was a step forward in technology that would erase a lot of jobs. And people no longer carry inter-office memos around, but the productivity gains of that weren't necessarily in job elimination. It was in refocus, and it was in the volume of business that an organization could do because it sped everything up. And this reminds me of that a little bit. This in terms of where the value seems to be start to coming from is in speeding these things without sacrificing quality, in some cases increasing quality. The
That's
thing
right.
that I know you're going to get to this, and the thing that I'm listening for here is in that third bullet point, 96% of HR queries without human input. And I know that this presentation is about, not just answering questions without human input, but actually starting to take action with or without human input. So I think that a lot of people in our audience are going to be listening very closely to that without human input.
Yeah.
wondering how we can, settle into a world where we can be, where we can be okay with a process like that going forward. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. And actually, it cuts two ways here for risk management. There's certainly the efficiency gains that the risk management organization can look towards.
Hmm.
But on the flip side, all of this comes with risk for not only the risk management organizations themselves, but the greater enterprise. And so, you know, people in today's call are going to have to look at both sides of the equation, probably more so than any other uh, function in the company. And
Hmm.
just another reason why this is such an important topic.
Yeah.
So let's move ahead here and kind of take a step back and look at what's going on in the world and why autonomous IRM really applies to the current events and what we're seeing happening in organizations today. And in looking at all the risk surveys that come out on an annual basis, you'll note that at the top of everyone's list, you'll see cyber. Cyber has been around in terms of a risk for, the last 5 to 10 years, but what's happening is it's not only becoming more pervasive within the business, it's becoming all consuming, meaning that not only are the security folks being burnt out by all the threats and vulnerabilities they're having to address, but it's impacting the folks on the front line and causing all sorts of business interruption in terms of the attacks or the ransomware that companies are having to deal with. And then on the back end, we've got the regulatory change aspects, trying to keep up with what's going on in the technology realm and how those technologies are changing. And that's squarely in the bullseye for autonomous IRM. And if we look a little closer at one of these surveys, which I really like, it's the Allianz Risk Barometer. For 4 years straight, cyber incidents have topped their list, and it's outpacing things that are as you know critical as natural disasters or business interruption, and it's leading to cyber being one of those top agenda items at the board level. And when it gets to the board level, what's happening is the board is having a hard time making heads or tails about what this incident really impacts when something occurs, whether it's an attack, ransomware, what have you. And the risks aren't domain specific anymore. It cascades across all of them, including digital, operational, and the human systems that are surrounding this technology that often lead to those cyber events, either through social engineering or some other factor. It's people and technology working together, and it's accelerating the speed of these risks and how they're emerging. And I know I'm not telling, or I know I'm singing to the choir here, not telling you anything new, but the fact is that the traditional approaches that we've used around governance and controls, static approaches or very siloed technology platforms, it can't keep up with the velocity that we're facing. And so, what do we do? What do we do with this? Well, most organizations are launching down the path, which I'm happy to see. What we found is that 48% of organizations admit that they have some form of centralized risk or resilient structures. And they've really been forced into this. I'm pretty sure the majority of these organizations are ones that have experienced some sort of an event that has caused them to take that step back and say, hey, we've got to streamline our ability to respond to a major event. And while that's all good, what we also see is that only 26% of those same organizations say they have strong collaboration or more of a holistic cross-functional view of risks. So while they may have all that risk data centralized and pulled together, it's the people that are using that information and are working together to plan for, scenario out these sorts of events and be prepared when they happen. That's where the real gap lies. It's bringing the people to the data. And legacy GRC systems, they've done a good job of helping organizations document and implement controls that were needed, and going as far as validating those controls with some what I would call rudimentary automated control or continuous control management. Largely those sorts of control activities, though, are not helping to prevent or predict some of these risks before they occur. And so, what we need is more of an autonomous IRM capability that will allow more dynamic understanding of what the current environment holds for the organization in terms of threats or vulnerabilities within the organization, but also how to respond in a very quick, effective manner that extends not only across the enterprise, but more and more externally into the world of third, fourth, fifth parties that are contributing to these risk events or need to be involved in the response and recovery. So it's very complicated and it requires something very different than what we've used in the past. So you're probably asking yourself, well, John is talking about this term autonomous IRM. What does he really mean by this? And especially in the world of AI right now, everyone throws the term AI around very loosely, and it can get very confusing as to what they really mean. And what I'd like to do here is just use a very simple analogy that I think everyone can relate to help you better understand what I'm talking about. And the analogy is autonomous vehicles. And I don't know where you might be located, but I'm based here in Atlanta, and we're one of the cities that is a pilot city for the Waymo automated vehicles. And in my neighborhood, I'm actually seeing these cars go down my street with no drivers. It's very alarming. I mean, we've all heard about these things coming to our neighborhood, but it's not until you see them actually drive through that you start to realize, oh my Lord, how is this happening? And the fear factor starts to set in. What are the risks here? What are the risks to pedestrians? Folks walking down the street, kids that might be, playing in the front yard. What's going on? Well, autonomous IRM is akin to that Waymo vehicle. And what it is doing is combining AI agents or automated capabilities through the combination of Gen AI and programming capabilities through Python or other high impact programming in an autonomous manner, and then combining that with telemetry. So being able to understand what's going on in the outside world through searching the web or other sources, and then applying that to adaptive workflows within the organization itself. So being able to actually take steps to potentially address a risk, whether it be through adjusting a risk assessment, maybe adjusting a control, or going all the way to remediation and helping um, to figure out the best way to recover from an event. And so when we start to see this, we start to think about, well, how are we going to prepare for this as not only an organization, but as a risk function? And what you need to think about is where you are in terms of your maturity in using technology and artificial intelligence. And I'm going to get into this a little later, but we've put together what we call our IRM Navigator Maturity Curve that defines very clearly the path that organizations need to take to prepare themselves for this new autonomous IRM world, or prepare for this autonomous vehicle world, if you want to use that analogy. And so this evolutionary path that everyone is on is fraught with change, but also fraught with the need to better understand what the different types of AI are and how they're being used in the organization. So, again, taking the analogy a bit further in terms of the automated vehicle, we can see with chatbots are something that you know we all know about, and they've been in place for 5, maybe even 10 years in some cases. And this is what I would compare to a vehicle becoming somewhat smarter. So maybe a decade old vehicles or 5-year old vehicles starting to provide information about how the vehicle is performing, giving you messages about whether you've got an engine problem, whether you've got a problem with the brakes, what have you, but very scripted. Not a lot of customization in terms of information or questions that are outside of the scope of what the purpose of that message tends to be. Where we are now today is really immersed in the Gen AI state. And so everyone's used ChatGPT or some other form of generative AI solution to really find answers to specific questions. But this generative AI is hugely dependent on that user initiating the conversation and prompting some sort of context that the AI can use in providing the answer that the user is looking for. So tomorrow, though, where we're going into the future in the world of agentic AI, this is the world of the true autonomous vehicle, or autonomous IRM. And in the world of agentic AI, you're looking at augmented action taking, where you give the AI a certain goal to accomplish and then let it go off on its own and determine the steps that it needs to take independently. And so while that is going to create all sorts of efficiencies, kind of going back to what Scott was alluding to earlier, it also comes with a lot of risk. And so we've got to look at how we're going to govern those enterprise workflows and make sure that it's drawing on the right data and that that data is of higher integrity. And so when you think about it within your own organization, you know, a great example I would say is going back to that legacy GRC kind of continuous control monitoring that may be in place. That control monitoring is really driven by some sort of scripted program or rules driven logic. And, it's very static. And so with the numerous controls across an organization or within a given business process, it's very difficult to make changes, especially as the environment is changing so rapidly. Agentic AI or autonomous IRM is going to give you that ability to adjust those controls on a real-time dynamic basis, you know, based on the activity that is taking place. And I'll get into this example a little bit more as we apply it to a specific process within the accounting function. But it's this dynamic nature that is the real, what I would say, holy grail of autonomous IRM. Now, you're probably thinking at this stage, wow, that's a lot to accomplish. What do we need to do? Well, what we've done at Wheelhouse Advisors is put together what we call the 5 functional layers of autonomous IRM. And these 5 layers really are a simplified way to think about what you need to include in your overall plan and structure as you start to mature your capabilities around artificial intelligence from a risk management perspective. And this draws upon 3 key frameworks that I think everyone, if they haven't already, should familiarize themselves with. But our model will help you do that. And those 3 key ones are ISO 42001, the EU AI Act, and then the NIST Risk Management Framework for AI. Those 3 combined will give you really the path, or I'd say the structure for building out the key processes, controls, policies that you need to build that foundation and make sure that you're starting out right. And the 5 layers that most organizations have some sort of activity going on already, um, they're not new. What is new is that they need to be tied together. They need to be integrated. And, for a lot of folks on the call who may be in the security function, what we find is, there's heavy activity with technology and AI, around threat intelligence and validation, kind of in the center part of this model. And then they're building out from there. They're trying to understand the relevance of those threats by bringing in a business orchestration view and understand how these threats fit into the assets and the business processes within the organization. But they also are looking to automate the remediation and response activities, and they need to coordinate that certainly with their business partners. And then looking out to kind of the outer edges of this model, you've got at the top certainly a need for strategic oversight extending all the way up to the board. And then you can't forget about the verification and audit and what sort of evidence is needed through AI to ensure that the AI, not only is the AI performing as it should, but the actual activities that is accomplishing, that they're accomplished in a way that meets the risk appetite of the organization. Okay, so let's jump into some real world examples and use cases, because this all sounds good in theory, but we really want to look at how is this taking shape in practice. So first example, and this goes back to what I alluded to before in terms of continuous control monitoring, and I'm going to apply this to a very simple example that every company faces, and that's accounts payable and the need to ensure that payments going out the door are not duplicated. And this has been a problem since business began. Now there's a lot of automation around determining what qualifies as a duplicate payment, and those controls will surface those duplicates based on a set threshold. Now, what autonomous IRM and an agent can do beyond that is start to monitor the patterns and detect maybe duplicates at lower amounts or across other areas, and then automatically adjusting those thresholds in real time and starting to tighten those controls, maybe based on vendor, maybe based on a project or a certain contract that has been written to make sure that everything is as tight as it can be. And so this demonstrates kind of the combination of not only learning that machine learning aspect of AI, but also taking action on those learnings without waiting for some sort of quarterly review and having a lot of money go out the door without any sort of recompense. Another example, and this is getting a little more complex and will tie back into that layered model that I just explained, and this is around cybersecurity. And I'm going to bring in examples of two other vendors and how they're working together to start to integrate the 5 layers together. And so one of the vendors you may know of is Safe Security, and they recently, within the last, I guess it's been 2 years now, time flies, but they acquired a company called Risk Lens, who has the FAIR model for quantifying cyber risk. So Safe Security has taken that and embedded it within their security solution to help security leaders better understand in dollar terms what is the risk to the organization and how it applies to an organization's strategic goals. Now, that you see in terms of the layers more at the top level, level 1, level 2, the strategic oversight and the business orchestration. What is the relevance of this sort of security issue? And then you bring in and integrate with a platform like ServiceNow, which really is focused in on levels 3 and 4, extending into level 5. So the threat intelligence, the remediation response, and getting into the verification, setting up for a complete audit. What they can do now is use agents to auto isolate those compromised endpoints, those assets, those technology assets where the telemetry crosses or determines that it crosses a risk threshold, and risk thresholds more in dollar terms. So it's driven by business need. And this gets into drawing in those 5 layers into the core of our IRM Navigator model and what we call PRAC, and makes it very, what we like to allude to, very practical for organizations, in that there are 4 key risk objectives that tie to the business that need to be accomplished: performance, resilience, assurance, and compliance. So in this case, by tying together the layers through agentic AI and autonomous IRM, you're tying together the performance and optimizing it based on a given financial goal. You're maintaining the resilience through ServiceNow, level 3 and level 4. You're producing verifiable information that can be audited and ensuring that the compliance, whether it's with a regulation or maybe even internal organizational compliance, is executed appropriately. A third example here, just to give you a little more insight into how this is all working. This goes beyond the organization into that extended ecosystem of third parties and vendors. And so what we're seeing is the use of AI agents and autonomous IRM to better understand how vendors are performing against service level agreements and risks that have been identified within those service level agreements as early warning mechanisms to perhaps, based on those breaches, shift to an alternate supplier on the fly so the agent can start redirecting orders to another supplier. This reduces operational downtime, of course, but it also can avoid regulatory penalties that may be in place, or regulations that may be in place that extend out to those responsible parties outside the organization. And what this does is, in my view, highlights the integration not only of the various layers all the way from level 1 through level 5, but also the cross domain orchestration between technology risk management, operational risk management, and GRC. So it's taking an understanding of the technology assets as they are being used outside the organization, how that ties into the business process from an operational perspective, and then the regulatory impact from a GRC standpoint. And speaking of GRC, just to round this out, the final example here is one of an AI agent that can use ISO 42001 and its framework to provide information in real time as to how or how not, how the organization is not complying with those ISO standards. And auditors, rather than having to go in themselves into a business unit or maybe a third party and do a physical review, they can rely on an AI agent to provide not only the evidence, but timestamp provenance. So actual verifiable, validated information that can fuel the audit and get those audit findings to the people, whether it be the manager in the unit or all the way up to the board and audit committee, get those findings in their hands so that they can act on them in a very quick manner. And here, the assurance objective, going back to PRAC, the assurance objective here is to be continuous and reliable and have verification at scale. And this is what the board and the audit committee is going to demand. As they try to increase their risk appetite around the use of AI, they've got to have some form of assurance at this level to launch these sorts of capabilities and projects. Okay, take a deep breath. We're going to speed up a little bit to get to the finish line. And to do that, I wanted to give you a better idea of what is happening in the IRM marketplace and what are the current market trends that are driving this use of AI and autonomous IRM forward. And it all comes down to our IRM Navigator model, which you see on the right-hand side here. It's got a lot of moving pieces, but let me break it down for you really quickly. What this does, I think, is in one snapshot gives you an idea of what of the components of the IRM market and what is being integrated across the organizations and what personas are taking notice and how they're becoming more and more involved. So if you start at the center, you certainly have risk as the guiding objective in terms of what are we managing. But there are 4 key domains, including enterprise, operational, technology risk, as well as GRC, that provide that understanding. And by integrating those 4, can bring in those risk objectives, the PRC risk objectives that I discussed. And then more and more, we're seeing the involvement of risk management consultants who are helping from an architectural perspective, helping organizations build this out and bring the key leadership into the usage of IRM to better understand the interconnected nature of risk, but also to help each individual leader better understand what they need to do in conjunction with their peers. And because of this activity, we are forecasting the entire IRM market to grow from what is now 61.6 billion in 2025 to 147 billion in 7 years' time. Huge amount of growth. And what's propelling that growth? What will propel that growth? Well, a lot of it has to do with AI. And it's one reason why we brought into the mix risk management consulting as part of our market forecast, because it is the fastest growing IRM segment today and will continue with a double digit CAGR going out to 2032, for the simple fact it's the risk management consultants that are operationalizing AI in organizations. And they're not only operationalizing it for organizations in their service offerings themselves, they are operationalizing AI and bringing advisory and assurance to organizations through digital FTEs. At the same time, technology risk management as a segment is going to continue to grow. It's at the second highest level of growth, but it's the largest area of dollar spend in the IRM market. And it's primarily being driven by the need for greater AI oversight, but also cyber risk quantification. So better understanding the technology aspects from a business perspective, but looking at it from a slightly different angle that chief information security officers, chief information officers, chief digital officers may not have that sort of perspective readily at their hands, and they need to communicate to their peers. So to see this in a slightly different context, then I'm going to start to go very quickly here because we're running out of time. But what we've put together here, Wheelhouse Advisors, on the RMC or risk management consulting side, is an evaluation of the top 10 risk management consulting firms. And we published a report that we call the Vendor Compass for Risk Management Consulting earlier this month. So it's available for you to access. And it goes into how these consulting organizations are addressing the AI challenge and how they're serving as the AI architects in the larger technology realm. And when you start to see more of that activity in the technology realm, again, you have to think about the dual sides of the equation, or the dual edges of the sword, if you will, cuts both ways. You've got the cybersecurity and protect objective, but also at the same time making sure that you're managing that risk in the way that it needs to be managed. And we're seeing that leading organizations are using AI to take activities like scenario planning, telemetry, attack service mapping, threat intelligence, risk quantification, auto remediation, all of these activities, and linking them together so that they can get a better view of what is actually happening in all of those layers that we discussed, and extends this IRM activity beyond those center layers that I described before, layers 3 and 4, into the outer layers, certainly the layer 5 audit and layer 1 and 2 from the strategic and business perspective. So how do you get to where you want to go, and where do you begin? I'm sure that's probably a big question in everyone's mind. And that's why we put together the maturity curve, the IRM Navigator maturity curve. And here you'll see that it's a 5-stage approach. And it's so important. What we've been discussing here, especially as we talked about the 5 layers, is starting in the right place, making sure you get that foundation in place and that you have the building blocks that you need. What we found is, in looking at organizations as they're progressing through these 5 stages, most organizations find themselves somewhere between stage 2 and 3, the coordinated and embedded stages. So, back to the survey information that I mentioned before, organizations are centralizing that risk data but they're struggling with coordinating the people around that data and embedding that into the risk processes all the way to the front line. And so to do that, they need greater automation. And they need to not only embed it in the front line, but extend it out to the broader ecosystem of vendors and third parties to be in a position to take on that autonomous IRM capability. And there's no easy way to the autonomous IRM stage. You've got to go through each of these steps. You can't skip a step or you're going to fail. It's a maturity, a growth process that everyone must follow. And at the same time, you've got to make sure you're tying in the governance requirements to satisfy the risk appetite at the board level. And what the board is looking for is some sort of stake in the ground that they can say, yes, we're ISO 42001 certified, or yes, we're compliant with the EU AI Act in Europe, or yes, in North America, we use NIST risk management framework as our basis. And within that, the main question they're going to ask beyond certification, if you will, is okay, if things just go wildly wrong, when the proverbial, what hits the fan, how do we turn this thing off? Or how do we know that the data that is being used is inaccurate or low integrity and is causing our business to fly off the rails? That's where they're looking for greater AI assurance. And in this assurance activity, you're starting to see greater involvement by internal auditors, but also external audit firms and regulators. And they're looking to verify that what you're implementing in terms of autonomous IRM is properly controlled and managed against the risk that is being assessed. And so it comes full circle again back to those 5 layers. In layer 5, you've got to have very strong assurance. And so to do that, you've got to start with PRAC, PRAC, tying in integration points and the domain owners that I described within the IRM Navigator model, and then be able to map each of those objectives to the personas and design verification gates as you start to build the autonomous IRM activity capability, the agent by agent build out process, that those verification gates are executed so that everyone is clear as you move towards full production of this sort of capability. What we recommend is a 12-week proof of value approach, starting small, really looking at 1 to 2 cross-domain use cases. And the key aspects here are tying it into metrics that are driven by PRAC, but also are using those integration points, kind of looking at the various aspects of the IRM Navigator model, goals, processes, assets, and policies, to have a broad risk spectrum covered within the use case, and it's not isolated to a given risk domain or function. It needs to be very holistic. You can learn more about this approach through the report that I mentioned earlier, Vendor Compass for Risk Management Consulting, where we lay out in detail the things that you want to accomplish and perhaps partner with a risk management consultant to do that. So to finalize and wrap up here, it's important for you as a risk leader to get started now. And what I would say is seize the risk offensive. And as risk leaders, and I will admit to this myself because I was a practitioner, is that it's very easy to get caught in the trap of fighting fires, looking to defend the organization, but not really looking to the future as to, how can we improve? And that's what I mean by seizing the risk offensive. And from an autonomous IRM perspective, you've got to understand that this is not something that is 10 years away. It's coming very quickly. And we're going to see mainstream adoption within the next 5 to 7 years. And so you think, well, 5 to 7 years, that's still far away. But what that means is mainstream adoption. It means the majority of companies are going to be actively utilizing it in their operations. It's the early adopters that are going to really gain the most from autonomous IRM from a strategic and competitive perspective. And it's the risk leaders who help drive that usage that are going to need to start building out those layers and tying it into the strategic oversight at the board level, but also the audit and verification at the regulatory and external audit level to be successful. And you've got to start doing that now to be in a position to roll these things out. So get started. We're here to help. If you have questions, by all means, feel free to reach out. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back to you, Scott, and see if we have some questions that we can answer.
Thank you very much, John. This is a wonderful presentation and fascinating. And there's something you were saying at the end here that I think I want to highlight and talk about a little bit, and that is the idea of um, the early adopters getting most benefit out of agentic AI. It occurs to me, and this would be the case for me too, but it occurs to me that a lot of people listening here, might be experiencing several blocks to, moving forward with, wanting to use agentic AI in risk management. And one of those blocks might be psychological. Right, one of those blocks. Certainly, it is for me. Right, it's like, oh, AI is going to be doing stuff. The thing that hallucinates is going to be doing stuff. Like heck, it is. Right, and I think it's worth pointing out that um, we've had automation-based adjustment of one kind of another for years and years. It was just decision tree based rather than having any kind of an LLM going through it. So in other words, we're constantly using if-then automations for things. We're constantly using decision tree automations for making the kinds of adjustments that you were talking about. Adjusting a particular parameter, adjusting which vendor gets which order. A lot of the things you come to your examples, it's just that those had to have been based in the past on structured data, right? You had to have total data integrity. You had to have it coming in, and it had to be numeric, and it had to be categorizable, and so forth. And now what we have, albeit with risks and needing assurance, is the ability to kind of do things similar to what we've been doing in our automations already, to having the benefit of having unstructured data drive that, not only drive the decision making, but not only drive the triggering of it, but driving the decision about the adjustment to be made and how much and so forth. So these things today are already done within certain parameters and have assurance checks and have spot checks and so forth. And really what we're talking about is perhaps a more modest next step that people are contemplating, which is just being more inclusive about the types of data that go into these decisions and what can come out of those decisions, what decisions can be made. Do you have any thoughts on perhaps stepping people in a baby step way into the next level of thinking about this, such that it's not this scary thing, but actually relates very well to things that we're doing already?
Yeah. And, I can appreciate the fact that not only you, but others on the call and myself included, we all tend to be, very structured in our thinking as risk leaders, but also very control oriented and, wanting to have things very defined. But we're managing in a world that lacks definition and increasingly is becoming hard to, you know, put into a box or put into um, a given process in a very neat way. Um, and that's why, we focus on building out those 5 layers, in that you've got to start somewhere and you've got to make sure that you understand, which um, which activities are most important as it relates to building out AI. And that's what we view as the 5 most important activities that you need to consider. And then, as you delve into them and define them out, you're putting in place, that box to make you feel a little bit more comfortable, but understanding that you've got to allow for greater flexibility based on the speed that not only technology is changing, but the business environment itself is changing. And so, you can't be paralyzed by, you know, analysis. You've got to get something out there and then just move forward. And to do that is to use that proof of value concept that I explained just in very little detail. But again, the report will give you a lot more information. But starting out with a pilot of 1 to 2 AI capabilities in a very focused way, but also in an area that may be of less risk to the organization, but start to sandbox this out and get involved and understand how those layers need to work together, um, is the only way you're going to be able to uh, be in a position to maybe, not be that early adopter, but be a fast follower. And, if I were in a company right now, I would definitely want to be at least in that fast follower camp, because things are happening so rapidly that organizations that aren't up to speed on using AI or governing AI the way it needs to be, not only are they going to be at a competitive disadvantage from a risk management standpoint, it's an existential risk. I mean, use of AI without proper um, going through those proper stages of maturity, it's like putting a teenager in a car without any sort of lessons, or maybe having an autonomous car out there that maybe wasn't tested appropriately, and it starts to drive off the road. So you've got to prepare now. I mean, that's all that is the focus really of this presentation, is you've got to start now.
I think that's actually a great note to leave it on. John, you've given us so much information. This has been really incredible. And I know everybody's got their eyes on this particular sector of risk management as it develops. So thank you very much for coming on Risk at Work with us today. Thank you very much for sharing this information. I know it was fascinating. I'm sure you're going to get lots of questions. And we really appreciate you and appreciate the value you bring.
Well,
And
thank
I
you.
want to thank you. And I want to thank everybody as well for joining us on the call. As always, we appreciate you spending some time with us, and we will see you on the next installment of Risk at Work. Take care.